So firstly, to introduce myself, so I'm Lisa Ronald, and I work as the Principal Educator with the trauma team at NHS Education for Scotland, or NES for short. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here speaking with you today, although just wish that we could actually be back to being in the one room together to talk about such important things as staff wellbeing and trauma-informed approaches, but we are where we are, stuck with the technology for now. So in terms of what I plan to cover today, so I'll briefly introduce the National Trauma Training Programme, what it is and how it came about. Some of you may already be familiar and indeed involved with the work that we do, but for others it might be less familiar. I'll then provide an overview of all the freely available learning resources that form part of the programme, before coming on to really highlight the importance of staff wellbeing as part of a trauma-informed system, and some of the resources to support that as well. So a lot of that you've already been hearing about from both Claire and Jessica this morning, so just really building on that. So in terms of what the National Trauma Training Programme is, back in 2016, the Scottish Government gave the commitment to the development and delivery of a national trauma training strategy. And that was really based on the recommendations of Survivor Scotland and their strategic outcomes and priorities document at the time. Although it was originally focused mostly on child abuse, the Scottish Government widened this remit to include the impact of all types of trauma experiences. So this vision that you see on the slide really came from survivors speaking about their experiences and the recognition that trauma is more common than we'd once realised. I don't believe it's an exaggeration to say that the National Trauma Training Programme really is groundbreaking in its ambition to have a trauma-informed nation. And the high level of commitment and support is really driving forward that change. And you'll be hearing about some of that today. So NES was then commissioned to lead on the implementation of the training programme. In particular, the development and delivery of educational and training tools to help meet the Scottish Government vision of that trauma-informed workforce. So in collaboration with key partners, a learning framework and training development plan was developed. And this really aimed to have the voice of those with lived experiences embedded throughout. So for those of you who have already seen these documents, familiar with them, you'll know that they're pretty meaty, but they are essentially the backbone of the trauma training programme and answer the questions of what do my staff need to know and what do they need to be able to do in order to support the aims of the programme, while also highlighting within the training plan what good trauma training looks like. So the learning framework and plan acknowledge that not everyone needs to be a trauma expert, but that trauma is everyone's business. You've already heard how common trauma is in our society. So we all need to be able to know enough in order to support recovery while unwittingly causing further harm or re-traumatisation within our services. So that's really what we mean in a nutshell about being trauma-informed. You'll see in this slide that the framework talks about 4 practice levels, going from trauma-informed right up to trauma specialist. So if we focus on the left-hand side of the pyramid, so everyone in the Scottish workforce should be at the trauma-informed level. That's what the ambition is. And most will also be at the skilled level. And thinking about social care services in particular, the majority of your staff will also be sitting at that skilled level. So at this level, staff won't have an explicit role in terms of supporting an individual's recovery from trauma. But given how common we know trauma is, they are likely to come into contact with someone who has been affected, and that trauma might be known or it might not. So we need to be universally applying the principles of trauma-informed care. And then as you go further up the pyramid, you become more specialist, and that is then actually responding and supporting the recovery of people affected by trauma. So there's a suite of learning resources that are freely available as part of the National Trauma Training Programme at each of these practice levels. A lot of the learning resources at that trauma-informed level really build on the knowledge and skills you already have and are no doubt using day in, day out within your services, while also furthering and strengthening your trauma-informed practice. So all of these resources, I'm not going to go through them all individually. You can find them in that interactive PD link that you see at the right-hand side of the slide, and you'll have the link to that, I believe, within your delegate packs. So that's where you'll find all the resources. However, today I want to focus specifically on a couple of the key resources and in particular highlighting the staff wellbeing support and tools that are available. I also know that Amy will be speaking to you shortly and introducing the newly launched trauma-informed toolkit, which is going to be such a welcome and useful addition to the suite of available resources, and really is that practical guide to what trauma-informed systems look like. Firstly, though, I want to show you one of our key resources, which is our animation opening doors. And this has been designed to support the whole workforce to become trauma-informed. And in a second, I'll ask Laura to show this video for you because I clearly can't be trusted with the technology. You may have seen this animation before, or it may be new to you, but what I would like to and encourage you to do while you're watching it is just to think about your own services and the people that you work with. So the majority of the film focuses on trauma-informed systems and services through the eyes of three fictional characters. At the beginning, it does refer to these characters' own trauma experiences, which includes childhood sexual abuse, domestic abuse and coercive bullying. And for a whole host of reasons, today might not be the right time to watch this film, and that is absolutely fine. So if you do need to, please just use this time to take a break away from your computer, put on the kettle, have a cup of tea, let the dog out the back for a pee, whatever it is you need to do in this time, and come back once you're ready. The film lasts about 9 minutes. And it's really available for you to watch anytime. So, but what I'll do for now is just to ask Laura to share that with you. Thank you.
Whenever Mum went away, he would come into my room. He said I made him do it, and that it meant he loved me. It always made me feel powerless, ashamed.
I never knew when an argument would turn into a fight. I was always scared, always on edge, always had to be ready to defend myself.
My late husband was very controlling, always put me down, told me what to wear or cook. He'd get angry if I didn't do things right. I had no choice or control. It made me feel useless. I had no confidence in the end.
So I zoned out, pretended it wasn't happening. It's so difficult to trust people now. I just freeze and float away in my head when I feel powerless.
Now I just get angry a lot, feel like I want to fight. Sometimes I worry I'm just like him.
I find it difficult to do things myself, and I get really nervous when I have to talk to new people. I avoid them when I can.
What we went through was traumatic because we were harmed, physically, emotionally. and felt like we were in real danger.
Traumatic experiences can be things that happen once, like a serious accident or assault.
Or it can be where traumatic things keep happening, like physical or sexual childhood abuse, or domestic abuse, or relationships where you can't be yourself, where you're put down or bullied.
It can make you feel powerless, trapped, or betrayed. The sense of confusion, shame, or fear can be overwhelming, especially if there is no one you feel able to tell. Even after it's over, it's harder to get on with life and feel safe.
Trauma is more common than most people think. Almost 1 in 5 adults has experienced physical or sexual abuse in their childhood.
And more than a quarter of all women have experienced domestic abuse.
Some people recover after traumatic events. Some people aren't affected as much. Having good, safe, supportive relationships with other people can really help. But lots of people continue to be affected by trauma, sometimes long after it happened.
For most of us, traumatic or adverse childhood experiences like these affect our body's response to stress, affecting our physical health as well as our mental health. The impact of trauma can also make it harder for us to learn and to realise our full potential.
One of the most worrying things about the experience of trauma is that it can make us avoid people and places, even if they are there to help, like doctors, teachers, social workers, carers, colleges,
Councils, community centres, employers, advisors. Because most trauma experiences happen in relationships with other people, we can find it difficult to trust people or feel safe. And sometimes the way we react to help ourselves feel safe pushes people away and makes it even harder to get the help we need.
It's like our brains learn survival tricks to get us through the trauma at the time, like priming us for danger.
Making us run away.
shutting down when we feel upset.
It might look like we have a short fuse, like we're unfriendly, or we're just a bit absent.
Anything, however small, that reminds us of that trauma can set off our own unique trauma response to protect ourselves, making us avoid the people and places that we need the most. Like you. But there are things you can do to help me trust you enough so I feel safe and I don't shut down or avoid you. You can offer me a different relationship that doesn't remind me of the one I had when I was a kid. One where I feel safe, I feel empowered, and I have choice and control over what happens to me. One where we work together and I can trust you. This is called being trauma-informed in the way you work.
Being trauma-informed means thinking about what will make me feel safe. It might mean offering me choice over the sex of the person offering me care or support, especially if it involves intimate care or examinations.
Unfortunately, your usual care worker Heather's off sick. We'll be sending someone else instead. Do you have any preferences about who comes instead?
Well, I'd feel more comfortable with someone I've met before. Most importantly, I'd like a woman.
Well, how about June? She's worked with us for 3 years. If there's anything you'd like her to do that Heather normally does, just ask.
Trauma-informed means empowering me to have control and take an active role in what happens to me.
We know some people don't like coming to the dentist, so is there anything that you're worried about or scared of? I can tell you each step I'm doing so there are no surprises if you'd like. If you need me to stop, how will you tell me?
Trauma-informed means helping me to trust you by being clear about what will happen, doing what you say you will do when you said you would do it.
Unfortunately, our advisors are running about 30 minutes late. I'm so sorry about that. Are you able to stay, or can we make another appointment for you?
Many of us at work will have had our own experiences of trauma in our own lives, or we might witness or hear about it in the course of our work. So the same principles apply to all of us. We all need to take care of ourselves. by making sure we're safe and connected to the people and activities that matter to us. Can you think of anyone you've met or worked with recently that a trauma-informed approach would have made a difference to? Are there any trauma-informed changes you might make that could make a difference?
So if you offer me safety and choice, if you collaborate with me and empower me and help me trust you, then you will help me work with you. Even if I only meet you once, even briefly, you can give me a different kind of relationship. One where I feel valued and valuable, connected and safe.
And when that happens over and over again with everyone that I meet, I can learn that it's safe to make connections with people.
It is those connections that we all need to access life chances and reach our full potential.
So what that film really shows is that often trauma happens within relationships, but that also recovery can happen within relationships, particularly those that adopt the key trauma-informed principles of safety, choice, collaboration, trust, and empowerment. As well as the opening doors, there's a similar animation for those working with children and young people that you'll see up on the slide called Sowing Seeds. But for both of these animations, there are recorded workshops which have been developed which really walk you through each step of looking at either your own practice or your service through a trauma-informed lens. So thinking about every aspect of the service you provide with that lens in mind. So we absolutely recognise and acknowledge all the experience and skills that you bring in terms of delivering your service, but hope these resources will complement the amazing work that you all already do while strengthening your trauma-informed practice. So the filmed resources will support your understanding of the impact of trauma and what trauma-informed practice is, while also supporting you and your colleagues to think together or as individuals about how people that you work with may have been affected by trauma and how you might adapt how you work with that understanding in mind. And by the end of the workshop, your team will have developed a kind of clear action plan outlining the agreed areas for change and development to really strengthen that trauma-informed practice. So these are really the key learning resources that are freely available and downloadable from the National Trauma Training Programme website, or you'll find the links within that interactive PDF that we spoke about earlier. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? We know that staff knowledge and skills and training on its own doesn't lead to trauma-informed change. It doesn't lead to a change in practice. How often have we been to training where we've come away feeling really motivated, really pumped up and desperate to implement what we've learned within our services, but when we go back into the same environment, the same issues, nothing else has changed bar what we've learned, how hard it is to actually implement that change. So there's other drivers that we really need to consider as part of that trauma-informed system. We need organisations firstly and foremostly to change and to embed the trauma-informed core principles, and that takes leadership to achieve this. NES delivers Scottish Trauma-Informed Leaders Training, or STILT for short, because we love our acronyms, to support this driver and to encourage leaders to look at every aspect of their organisation from top to bottom through that trauma-informed lens. So you have the individual workshops that I've just referred to for your team and for your individual practice, and there's then similar in terms of focused on strategic leaders and how they look at their organisations through that trauma-informed lens. It's also really important that we evaluate the impact of the work we do and use feedback loops. So this really encourages and supports us to continue the development work and the change and putting it into practice. Another key driver is collaboration and shared power. So that meaningful engagement with individuals with lived experience, and that is crucial at all levels of the trauma-informed system. And of course, what we're now going to be focusing on, staff wellbeing. We can't expect to implement trauma-informed change and development without first and foremost having a healthy workforce and ensuring that there's structures in place to support this. So we've been hearing about how trauma and adversity is much more common than we once thought. So there is no them and us, it's just us and us. So we need to make this a trauma-informed system for everyone. So trauma is everyone's business. So staff wellbeing is important at any time of the year, but after the year we've all had, this is especially true just now. And let's face it, none of us are really okay just now, are we? We're all surviving and we're getting on with the work that we need to get on with. And of course, there's resilience there, but we keep getting told we're in unprecedented times. And so we need to give our own and others' well-being even more attention. However, I think it's also really important to remember that although we're all in the same storm, we're not all in the same boats. So some of us might be in a single man canoe trying to ride the strong tides as best as we can on our own. Some of us may have had a leak in our boats before the pandemic even hit, so may have been firefighting from the get-go and frantically trying to empty our boats of water before they sink, and then added into this a pandemic, a tidal wave. For others, they might be in a good position. They might be in a well-maintained ship with a crew of staff ready to take the helm when needed. So every individual, every service, every system is going to be different. And it's about being aware of where you and your service is at in terms of that trauma-informed journey, and to understand what the needs are going to be as we all ride this storm and come through the other side of it. So just take a wee sip of water, excuse me. Definitely a sign I'm talking too much. So I wanted to briefly outline a model that was actually developed by the British Psychology Society and was aimed at healthcare staff, although I think absolutely equally applies to social care colleagues too. Now, I know I don't need to tell all of you of the massive impact the last year has had on wellbeing. However, I really like this model because it draws comparison with the different phases of the pandemic with varying psychological responses and wellbeing needs. And I just find it really relatable. So at the first stage, so back January, February, March, when we knew this tsunami was coming, we were hearing about COVID. There was a lot of kind of fear, a lot of kind of anticipatory anxiety about what was going to come, dealing with the unknown, feeling unprepared, but at the same time totally overwhelmed with the amount of information and just the scale of the task, and concerns about health and safety of ourselves, of our families, of the people that we work with. And I know particularly working within the care home sector, a lot of preparation and planning was going into how we could help, particularly working with people who may have dementia, how we're going to help them understand what was coming, and particularly things like the isolation that might come from that, and how to try and minimise distress. So there was an understanding we're not going to totally prevent distress, but how do we minimise that, and lots of concerns around that. Then the tsunami hit and we all went into action mode. So it was all hands to the pump. So working very instinctively and focused. At this time there could be lots of camaraderie between people, but also as well quite a lot of silo working. So people back within their one-man canoe trying to fight the currents alone. As the pandemic progressed and weeks were turning into months, there was then that work-life tension. I know I hear some incredible stories of people who have actually moved out their family home and into care homes in order to prevent that cross-contamination. between the areas. So that tension between the work and life creeping in. And eventually, again, as more time goes on, just feeling really worn out and exhausted. And let's face it, our own well-being becomes the bottom of the priority, and we start absorbing the needs and distress of others, whether that's at home with your family or at work. And we're in the caring profession because we care, so that's almost a natural instinct. There was also the feeling, the need to kind of tough it out, especially if it looked like other people were coping and doing the same. So feeling the need that we need to keep going. And of course, we had grief and loss multiple times over. And all of this was happening while we had our usual ways of coping not necessarily being available to us. So we're not able to hug people, we can't meet up with family and friends, or maybe your gym was always your sanctuary away from family and work. You're not able to do that. I have to say, gym doesn't do that for me, but for some people it might. And then as we come to the end of this road, we kind of saw it last summer, but went back up the phases, is recovery. So time for reflection. And as you're hearing, most people will be able to cope, especially if we take steps to look after our well-being. And actually, for some people, they might report changes in a positive way. But for some, there might be more of an impact and more of a longer term impact. And we know, especially for people who have wider family and social stressors. And then going on, a smaller number of people, thankfully, will have significant ongoing distress. So as we move in and out the different phases of the pandemic, some of these might overlap and run into each other. However, it highlights, I believe, the importance of paying attention to well-being at each and every phase in order to protect our well-being. So this slide really is just kind of supporting what I was saying. Again, looking at the left side of this pyramid. So these bottom tiers really is about the preventative, proactive strategies that we can take to protect our well-being. And that's what the majority of the resources I'll be talking about today will be focused on, those two bottom tiers. So that's for the majority of people. And then as we go further up this pyramid, we're having to be more reactive in terms of actually intervening, where we've not been able to prevent our distress or ongoing distress. And at the very top of that pyramid, there might be then more targeted, individualised intervention delivered, for example, by a clinical psychologist. Each of these levels, but as I say, the main focus is going to be the preventative, proactive. But staff wellbeing is not just the responsibility of one individual. In fact, about 80 to 90% of wellbeing is actually about external factors. So it's not just about looking after ourselves, but also each other and continuing to do that. But we also need to have systems and organisations that are looking out for us, that are looking after us. So at that individual level, it's how as normal human beings are we responding under this pressure, under this stress, and what do we do about that? So being aware of our own warning signs of stress and putting in place a plan to respond to that. At the team level, it's really about supporting each other and staying connected at work, just what Claire has been talking about. So it's about having that flotilla of boats that we need, and to consider how we care for each other as part of that system. And I promise that's the end of my boat and storm metaphor. You'll be glad to hear. For managers, it's really about modelling self-care and prioritising the well-being of staff and your own well-being. If staff see you doing it, they are much more likely to do it as well. So take care of your own resilience and your well-being needs, and I'll talk about some resources that can help with that in a second. And at that organisational level, again, it's about having that culture and leadership that puts staff wellbeing front and foremost and centre within a trauma-informed system. So leadership that embodies the trauma-informed principles we've been hearing about. So I'll now speak about the available resources to support all of this. So you've already heard today about the National Wellbeing Hub, but I just wanted to highlight it again. And I just love their tagline, you look after us, so we look after you. So that idea of we're all in it together, we all need to look after ourselves and each other. And there's lots of fantastic work going on around Scotland on staff wellbeing. However, what I'm going to be focusing on are the kind of key NES resources. So first of all, in order to be able to look after others safely and effectively, we first need to look after ourselves. So I really like that analogy when you're on the plane, you get that safety briefing where it says, please put on your own mask first before helping others. And I think this absolutely applies here when we're talking about well-being. So there is a wellbeing planning tool and an animation that you can use that describes the ABCs of self-care. And you can use both of these resources together to help you create your own unique plan for looking after yourself and protecting your well-being. But equally, you could be using this alongside colleagues or peers and to help structure these discussions and connections together as well. So a lot of it will be reinforcing what you're hearing from Claire, but this is just a tool to support that. So basically, the planning tool highlights self-care as a two-step approach. So knowing your warning signs and triggers and actively planning and managing your well-being and responding to those triggers. When you break it down into these two steps, it sounds like self-care is an easy thing to do, but we know it's not. It's not just about running yourself a relaxing hot bath or going for a walk, although of course these things might be in your plan. Self-care in and of itself won't solve all issues. We've already spoken about the need for healthy systems and leadership that support staff well-being. However, what self-care is about is building the resources to cope when things get really tough. So having those protective things in place. So full disclosure here, I know if I don't practice and prioritise my own well-being, I'm left exhausted and my poor family who then get my grumpiness at the end of a working day. So I try and go for a walk at lunchtime. And I know when I do this, I'm much more productive at work and I'm 100% less stressed. But when I overly focus on my work, I feel really overwhelmed with the amount I need to do and I try and push on through breaks and I don't have my walk. I am much less productive, but completely more stressed. Again, poor family who then get the exhausted me in my jammies by 7 o'clock. So full disclosure there, self-care is so important and we need to work at it. But again, as I keep reinforcing and want to keep reinforcing, while individual care is of course important, it's also about how systems and organisations look after it. So as a manager or an employer, when you're asking staff to go into an environment which might have physical risks or risk to our safety, there are laws in place that state that there's steps you need to take to prevent injury. So you need to provide protective equipment, health and safety training, PPE equipment for infection control, like with COVID. So when we ask staff to go into environments that are going to have a risk to our psychological well-being, it's just as important that we make sure that we provide the same level of psychological protection. So what do managers and systems need to do? So I know a lot of you joining us today will be service managers and have or team leads and have really felt the last year for yourself, but mostly for your staff and your services and the people that you serve. You are absolutely the experts with within your own services and the needs of your service and staff. But the following resources that I'm going to talk about are focused on supporting employers and managers with that really important role of leading teams, particularly through a pandemic, but also beyond and after it as we uncover. So how do we employ the emotional PPE? So this e-module that I've got up on the screen just now, all of these modules are available on the NES Learning Platform TURAS. Anybody can access and log in, getting a 2RAS account. All you need is an email address. So please don't be put off. Some people have been feeding back that it looks like it's just for health staff. It's really not. It's for everybody. So please, if you've not already done so, sign up and get a 2RAS account. So this e-module really helps managers, planners and team leads to understand the evidence-based factors that support the well-being of teams through crisis events such as what we're going through with COVID. So it contains information about proactive strategies to protect the well-being of teams, as well as how and when to respond effectively to concerns about an individual's mental health, either during or after the crisis. So remember that pyramid that I showed you earlier. So at what point in the pyramid, how do you access support? How do you recognise what level of support someone needs, and how do you access that support? So all of the modules that are on the 2RAS page and from NES are based on the principles of psychological first aid that you've been hearing about, which is the most evidence-based and most recommended in terms of how to respond both during and after a crisis. So that really is the key module for managers. But finally, I also wanted to highlight these care home podcasts that the Psychology of Dementia team at NES have developed. So these podcasts really use the principles again of PFA and the practical strategies to protect managers and staff when faced with heightened stress at work. So I can really recommend them. They're based on the e-learning modules that we've just described, but again, as I say, they're just focused specifically for care home staff. So in summary, we have on the right-hand side our key principles of trauma-informed systems, but also the drivers that are needed for trauma-informed change. So it's not just about developing and delivering training. We also need to consider staff wellbeing and support, that we've got a healthy workforce. And we also need to have that cultural shift, and that takes leadership and systems that also embed the principles of trauma-informed care. So it's not just applied at that individual practice level, but at that organisational level. And also as well that the voices of those with lived experiences are absolutely listened to and embedded throughout that system. So that was pretty much everything I was wanting to talk about today. I'm going to put up a slide which has a link to a wellbeing sway which highlights all the resources that I've talked about today and others, and provides links to these as well, which I believe also was in your delegate pack. So I just wanted to finish on that. So thank you all so much for listening and persevering there. It's been my absolute pleasure presenting to you today, not being there in person sadly, but I wish you all the very best for the rest of your day. Thank you.